Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom.
Being Jewish and gay are central to who I am. If asked to choose between the two, I don't know how I would answer. Both are the lenses through which I see the world. They make up my identity. Without a solid identity, one is broken. I want every child in our school and youth program to have a strong, positive Jewish identity, and I do not want anyone to feel broken. One needs to see oneself in the world. When one doesn't see oneself, it is like looking in a mirror and seeing nothing. Just as sexual orientation is about identity, so too is gender. Some, including members of Congress, would have you think otherwise. When talking about what to teach children in kindergarten through third grade in our public schools, they shout that we can't be teaching how two men have sex. They don't understand that talking about sexual orientation and gender does not need to involve discussions of sex. Talking about sexual orientation and gender means we recognize that in our community, we have people of different sexual orientations and genders. Having books in our classrooms and library representing our children and their families shows our children that they exist in the world. I want every child to know they exist in the world. I am a child of the 80s. I grew up in the era of Madonna, Michael Jackson, the Go-Go's, Duran Duran, Thompson Twins, Boy George, and Cyndi Lauper. It just shows you a little bit of my music interests. I grew up in a world of consumerism and materialism, a world that was just fun. Judaism was my life. I grew up going to a Jewish day camp. My family belonged to a conservative synagogue, very similar to Temple Amunah. The synagogue was my life. I was there practically every day of the week. In high school, I was part of our synagogue's Israeli folk dance troupe. I attended religious school through 12th grade, and I was involved in USY, serving as chapter president, regional president, international Seder vice president, attending USY international conventions, Kinusim, and participating on USY on Wheels, USY Pilgrimage, and Nativ. I was revered in my synagogue. Following high school, I attended the Jewish Theological Seminary's undergraduate school and worked for USY and Ramah in the summers. I also grew up in the era of AIDS, at a time when homosexuality meant getting AIDS and AIDS meant dying. I grew up in a world of fear. I knew I was gay. My adolescence and college years were spent hiding this identity. I didn't want to die and I didn't want to be alone. I held on tight to my Jewish identity and I grew up closeted. My Jewish world was solid. I felt secure in it. I wanted others to experience Judaism and to learn about it. I chose to go into Jewish communal work. I knew that at that time, I couldn't be out and work in the Jewish world. And so I also chose to remain closeted. In 1991, I began my studies in social work at Boston University, and my closed Jewish world started to change. For the first time, I was in a community with people who were openly gay. I came to realize how broken I was and how I had pushed aside one of my identities and how unhealthy that was. In the fall of 1993, I decided to come out. It was a process that continues to this day. I mostly gained, but I also lost. In many ways, what I feared would happen happened. I lost friends. I was no longer revered at the synagogue where I grew up, and I was no longer seen as a positive role model by USY. I was seen as unfit to staff their summer programs, the same ones I staffed only a few years prior. I wanted to be a role model for others, and I wanted to make a difference in the Jewish world. I knew I couldn't do this in the conservative movement at that time. I separated myself from the movement that played such a central role in my Jewish development for more than a decade. It wasn't until the latter part of the first decade of this millennium that I was able to be hired as an educator in the conservative movement as someone openly gay. And so I returned to my roots. I know that I've said this to some of you before, but where I am now is where I never thought I could be. Here I am today, a very out director of congregational learning at a conservative synagogue. I am in a position to be an agent of change, the change agent I wanted to be. I take this role very seriously. I bring to it my understanding of the importance of a positive sense of self and a lifetime of positive experiences in wonderful Jewish learning environments. I want every child in my school and youth community to be recognized, valued, and loved. This past year and a half in particular, I've seen noticeable change in our religious school and youth communities. In the spring of 2021, while we were completely on Zoom, we held an Ask Rabbi Learner Day for our 5th and 6th graders. As we were gathering, one of the students sent me a message in the chat. The child came out to me as non-binary. I was honored that the child trusted me with this information and said such to them. We moved on to Mincha, which is how we start our weekday religious school classes. And afterwards, we welcomed Rabbi Lerner and opened our discussion. Rabbi Lerner responded to a question about bar mitzvah and mentioned how at Emunah, those reaching the age of mitzvah now have the opportunity to mark the milestone with a bar, bat, or ba mitzvah. In light of the chat I had before class with that student, I asked Rabbi Lerner to please explain what ba mitzvah means. Rabbi Lerner talked about this fairly new option, and the student who had come out to me told the class they were going to have one. I cried. It was a moment I will never forget. I'm going to cry now. At the end of last year, 3 middle school children told me that they were either bi, non-binary, or gay, all on the same evening. I was overwhelmed. What world was I living in? Certainly not the world I grew up in. Again, I was honored to be the recipient of this information. How wonderful that our students could come out to me. How wonderful that they could share their authentic selves with me. This fall, our religious school started in much the same way that it ended in 2021. On Sunday mornings, I noticed students and madrichim wearing pins, non-binary, pride, LGBTQ. One child told me she was part of my community and that I was a G and she was an A. This is a 5th grader. On another occasion, that same student asked me about my relationship with queer. I told her we were married and she responded telling me that she liked me before, but liked me even more now. A few other students told me and faculty members that they would now like to be referred to by they, them pronouns. There are those who don't understand this and get stuck with whether or not this is grammatically correct. I myself am getting used to using the word queer. I remind folks that we don't need to understand. What we need to do is accept. In the Torah, we learned that the children of Israel responded to receiving God's laws with na'aseh v'nishma. We will do and we will hear. In other words, do first, understand later. We need to do the same as educators. We have made it clear to our students and youth that they are part of our community and that we will address them the way they want to be addressed. Many days I walk around in awe of the world we are living in. We are living in a moment. It is overwhelming and wonderful. We have worked hard at creating a safe and accepting youth community, and we have arrived at a place where we want to be. We should celebrate what we have accomplished in our community. I would like to think I have contributed to creating a safe and healthy space for our children. Of course, I also need to give credit to the public and private schools our children attend and their families for providing them with support to be able to actualize their identities. In many locales, our society has changed. Often our children are leading the way and showing us. Interestingly enough, the pandemic has accelerated the process. Dr. Betsy Stone, a retired clinical psychologist whose topics of interest include teens and their brains, and many others, tells us that a year out of the classroom gave children the opportunity to live without the social pressures of in-person learning and gathering. Children have had the freedom to experiment with their clothing and how they present themselves to the world. This is being experienced throughout the country. However, some days I walk around in despair. The anti-gay and transgender laws being enacted across our nation scare and anger me. Yet every time we run a program like the one our Kids Social Justice Club ran on transgender and non-binary kids with author of the book, My Sister Daisy, which is out on the table, and we add another book to our library, I celebrate and take pride in our not having a library that is pulling books off the shelves. I didn't add this in what I'm reading, so I'm ad-libbing now. But for my birthday this year, I received these wonderful mugs from 2 of our madrichim, who said to me they hoped that they hadn't offended me. They most certainly did not. These gifts told me that they saw me and that they loved me and they didn't need to fear. What do they say? One says queen and one says Yaz queen. So they're on my desk in my office. Earlier this week, I received a text message from another one of our teens wishing me happy Pride Month. And on Thursday, I received a text message from Ari Lerner with a picture of folks gathered in Jerusalem for Jerusalem Pride saying, "Look where I was today." I love the fact that our children know they can share freely with me and don't take for granted that I can be open with them. I don't want anyone to have to choose between their identities like I did. Our children know they can be their authentic selves in our community. There was a time when we would have most likely lost our non-heterosexual and non-binary children, or our non-binary children, to our world. I hope this is a thing of the past. I look forward to continuing the journey we are on and providing our children with positive Jewish experiences in a community where they can be true to themselves and feel a sense of pride in being who they are and being Jewish. Let us take pride in this moment and celebrate.
Oh. We're going to invite Sivan. Thank you so much, Mayor. Do you want the cups?
Good morning. My name is Sivan. My pronouns are he, him. I'm 17 years old, and I proudly identify as transgender. Let me take you back 17 and a half years. On November 16th, 2004, 2 babies were born in Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City. At 4:04 p.m., the doctor said to my parents, "Congratulations, you have a baby girl." And 5 minutes later, at 4:09 p.m., they said, "Congratulations, you have a baby boy." 8 days later, my parents revealed to the world their kids' names. They named their baby girl Sivan and their baby boy Lev. I had a great childhood. After living in New York City for 3 years, we moved to the east side of Providence, Rhode Island, where we had an amazing Jewish community through our synagogue and my school, and I had incredible friends and played on great sports teams. My parents encouraged all 3 of their kids to pursue what they were interested in. And for me, one of those things was sports. From a young age, I absolutely loved sports. Whether I was on the baseball diamond or the basketball court or the soccer field, wherever I was, as long as I was playing sports, I was happy. That was where I was most comfortable, where I was most me. Around the 4th grade, I realized that I would just be more comfortable wearing boys' clothes. So the next time my mom took me to Old Navy, that's what I did. I shopped in the boys section, and that was totally fine. But in 5th grade, I started to feel this disconnect between the gender everyone perceived me as, a girl, and the gender I felt on the inside, not so much a girl. So one afternoon, I was hanging out with my twin brother in the room that we shared after school, and it was a regular afternoon. It was the beginning of spring, and we had the window open, and we had one of those Nerf basketball hoops that you like slide over the back of a door, and we were playing with that. The radio was on. There was some 2014 pop music playing, and we were just having fun, talking, shooting baskets, and all of a sudden I turned to him and I said, "Lev, sometimes I feel like a boy." And he looked at me and he paused for a moment and he said, "Okay, well, keep on wearing boys' clothes and playing sports." The relief that rushed through my body, that at 10 years old, these feelings that I was unable to make sense of, but my brother took them in stride, it was incredible. And his advice made perfect sense to me. So that's what I did. I kept being me. And it was enough until it wasn't. Until I entered middle school and the standards of femininity and masculinity increased. And for the first time in my life, I felt a pressure to conform to a person I wasn't and knew I would never be. I began to withdraw and become depressed. I dealt with mental health challenges. And 2 years later, these feelings, they were taking over my lives. They were my life. They were clear. Inside my head was screaming, I am a boy, but nobody knew it on the outside. And so when I was in 7th grade, through many conversations, I told my parents, I know you know me as a girl, but that's not who I am. I'm a boy. I want to pause here for my story for a minute and note that even if you're the most supportive, loving, progressive parents like my parents are, that's a big deal when your child comes to you and says, you got something wrong about me. And even through the hard times, my parents have supported me and loved me. And that's exactly what they said they would do. So once I told my parents, I got a short haircut and I changed my pronouns from she, her to he, him. And it was time to tell everyone else. And I did. And I was happy. Finally, the outside was matching up with my inside. There was only one problem left. I was in 7th grade, the prime time for puberty. My body was betraying me and it was miserable. So I talked to my parents about those feelings and they brought me to the gender clinic at Boston Children's Hospital, which was actually the first one in the country to provide gender affirming healthcare to transgender and non-binary youth. In the past 4 years, the healthcare I've accessed there has been life-saving. I do want to point out and make it incredibly clear that you do not transition one day and the next go on irreversible hormones or have surgery. It is a process. But through this 4-year process, I have been so lucky and I have so much gratitude for my parents who loved me and supported me even when it was hard to take me there, and to the doctors who have devoted their professional lives to helping kids like me feel as comfortable as they can in their bodies and live their lives to the fullest. I can confidently say that I do not know if I would be here today without the gender affirming healthcare I have received. The tiny little implant right here in my arm that blocks estrogen from coming through my body is life-saving. The testosterone I get that I inject myself with on a weekly basis that makes me go through the puberty as my cisgender male friends is life-saving. The top surgery I was able to get at 15 years old with an incredible surgeon at Boston Children's Hospital was life-saving. So it's been 4 years since I transitioned and I'm doing amazing. I'm really just a regular teenager. I'm 17 years old and a junior at Gann Academy, and I'm starting the college process, and I love to play soccer. I have a passion for working with kids with diverse needs. I complain about my homework here and there. I stay up too late and then always regret it in the morning. I'm really just a regular teenager. I also get to use my voice and my story to change people's opinions and to educate people about trans youth and how awesome we are. I get to do this in incredible ways, like today here with you all, and also on national levels, being interviewed for national television, working with Nike. It is so important that trans youth share their stories because people's minds and opinions do evolve and do shift when they learn the truth. If there's one thing I want you to take away from my story, it's this. When trans youth are loved and supported for who we are, we thrive. Thank you.
Right? I mean, Lori had said that it should be the other way around, that I should go first and Sivan should go second, and now I'm realizing I should have listened to her. Shabbat Shalom. In the 3rd century, the rabbis who put together the Talmud wrote a list of instructions for parents. The list includes teaching your children Torah, teaching them a trade, and teaching them how to swim. I would add to that list, supporting them in living their best lives. So if your kid loves baseball and is his best self on the baseball field, you sign him up for Little League and you take him to the batting cages and make sure there's space for him to practice pitching. And if your kid has some learning challenges, you find learning support so that he can get through his day, his academic day, really understanding what he's being taught. And if your child tells you that their body does not reflect the gender they are, your job as a parent is to support them. Now, don't get me wrong, buying baseball posters is way easier than this one. In fact, while supporting Sivan, Lawrence and I had a lot of work to do. We had to truly understand what being transgender meant. We had to learn that the feeling of not being in the right body doesn't just happen when you're little, which is what we had thought. It can happen when you hit puberty and even later in life. While supporting Sivan with getting a shorter haircut and buying show clothes from the boys section, we had to explore what medical interventions meant. And the truth is, and this is something that until last night when I was reading this to him, I actually hadn't even said to Sivan. And it honestly feels uncomfortable to say, but I had to mourn the loss of the daughter I had. For me, Sivan's transition came at a particularly heightened time. Within 6 months, my grandmother passed away, my mother passed away, and Sivan started testosterone, which changed how his face and his body looked. I held my grandmother and my mother's faces in my hands as they passed away, and then I felt like I was losing yet a third female face with Sivan. But what I soon realized is that Sivan will always be Sivan. He will always be the child who buys me flowers on Mother's Day, the only one in the family. Take that in. And he'll be the only one to notice if I'm wearing something new. He's the same Sivan who's supportive and empathetic of his friends and laughs hysterically with his brothers. I soon realized that I actually didn't need to mourn a loss. In fact, I had the opportunity to celebrate seeing my child become the best version of himself. I've been in awe of how Sivan has been more comfortable being himself. In fact, since he doesn't have to spend so much time worrying about presenting himself as someone he isn't, he's been able to focus more energy on his own personal growth and the world around him. Once I did the work of educating myself, I realized that it was not okay for me to stand in Sivan's way of living his life as it's meant to be. I thought about how if I'm wearing an uncomfortable piece of clothing or shoes that are too tight, all I can think about is how uncomfortable I am. I just want to get rid of all of it so that I can feel comfortable and free again. Now imagine if it's not just a piece of clothing or a pair of shoes that you can take off. Imagine if it's your body. Once we allowed Sivan to start taking testosterone, we saw how he immediately blossomed into a body and personality that was more extroverted than introverted. Sivan, since he wasn't busy hiding the parts of himself that didn't make sense to him, he was able to find his voice, his truth, and truly shine. And once we allowed him to have top surgery, his world opened up. He was able to run around, play soccer, take the dog for a walk, and even just get through the day without pain in his ribs or shortness of breath that came from binding his chest. Once he had the surgery, he was able to literally breathe. And once you're free to breathe, imagine everything else that's possible. His life had been getting smaller and smaller. By supporting and accepting Sivan for who he is, he's been able to lean into being his best self. Now, let's get back to the Talmud telling parents that they have to teach their kids to swim. I've just always loved that. I love how clear it is. I love that teaching our kids the skills to keep themselves alive is a central goal as parents. So when parents and schools or the government don't allow trans children to be who they are, it's sometimes impossible for these kids to be free, to literally breathe. The attempted suicide rate for trans youth who aren't supported is close to 50%. 50%. If I'm supposed to teach my child to swim, that means I must be able to access medical interventions that he needs. And that means that the medical interventions need to remain a legal option. With Sivan's transition, I often think about soccer, the game Sivan has loved since he was little. Some of you might have had this experience when your kids were little, when you go to the soccer league field with lots of little kids and they're just all running around trying to shoot the goal. It's a little hilarious. I was always amazed by Sivan because even when he was little, he focused on passing the ball, not necessarily just him getting it into the goal. He had the goal of working with his teammates to win the game. He always positioned himself so that he could pass the ball or be open to have the ball passed to him. In order to ensure his team's success, he was thoughtful about how to work together to make sure everything was aligned for his team to score a goal. I've learned that I need to support Sivan in making sure that everything is aligned in order to set him up for success. That means supporting Sivan in his journey. And it also means talking with all of you and others to continue advocating for our children's rights to be who they truly are. To quote the great Marlo Thomas, who helped raise me with her seminal album, which I still have in its original album cover at home, I took from my dad's house, sorry. There's a land that I see where the children are free. It's our job as parents to make sure this land is free for all of our children. One of the messages I want to share is that kids like Sivan are just as amazing as other kids. But the truth is, because of what they've had to think about, they're actually a bit stronger. Sivan has had to deal with discomfort. He's had to find a way to use his voice and ask for the supports he needs. And he continues to be a teacher on this issue to all of those around him, all while being his amazing 17-year-old self. I am so grateful to be his mom. And I'm also grateful to the Amuna community for giving us the space to share our stories. Thank you and Shabbat Shalom.